Before we start our program, I just want to mention some other events that we would like to invite you to and hope you can join us at. On May 6th, we are going to have our annual meeting, and that will be at 2 p.m. at the Watermill Community House. And aside from the business meeting, we have a speaker who is Kristen Slevin, and she's a young woman who ran for supervisor of Smithtown as an independent and has a very interesting story to tell, which I'm sure you would find very interesting. Then on May 16th, the Suffolk County League of Women Voters is going to have their annual meeting, and that's going to be at the Vanderbilt Museum. And including lunch and a tour, it will be only $22. So everyone is invited to come, and we hope you can. On May 24th, we then have the debate and between the candidates, the official candidates for the congressional seat that's now held by Mr. Zeldin, and that's going to be at Hampton Bays High School.
It's a primary.
Primary.
It's a primary
Sorry.
on the Democratic candidate.
Yeah, meant to say that.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
And that's going to be, did I say Hampton Bay High School? Yes. And June 7th, there's going to be a, wait a minute, I've got my dates mixed up here. Yeah, no, June 7th, a tour of Southampton, a sightseeing tour of Southampton, and that will be in Southampton, obviously. And then on June 11th, here at 7 p.m., we're going to have another meeting with two town trustees, two from East Hampton and two from Southampton. And they will be discussing what it is that the trustees do and what they're responsible for. So we have a whole slew of things we would like to invite you to, and we hope you'll be able to join us at some of these. And now I'm going to turn this over to Sue Wilson, who will moderate the program.
Thank you, Estelle. How does this microphone sound good?
Does to me.
Okay, thank you. And as long as everyone can hear, that's fine. Good evening. As Estelle said, I'm Susan Wilson. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Hamptons, and I'm very pleased that you were able to come this evening to our public information meeting on immigration and its impact on the South Fork. A big subject. This evening, 4 speakers will share their perspectives on immigration within a framework that acknowledges that we are a nation of immigrants and that immigrants have been and are a significant labor source for the regional economy. Our speakers this evening will be Martha Potter, a League board member and historian. Martha will address the history of immigration legislation and how it has impacted Long Island. Michael Nenner, general manager of Gurney's Montauk and Gurney's Newport, will discuss immigrant issues raised in the hospitality industry. Rob Carpenter, administrative director of the Long Island Farm Bureau, will speak about the impact of immigration on East End agriculture. And Larry Cantwell, former East Hampton Town supervisor, will outline some ways immigrants impact government services. A well-rounded group. Please welcome them. Since this program is being recorded by CTV and visuals are very important, I'd like to ask each speaker to bring their name sign with them when they come to the podium to speak. Be nice to know as the camera is watching you who you are as you're speaking. Thanks. I'd also like to ask the audience to please hold all questions till all speakers have completed their presentations. Thank you. Let's begin. Our first speaker is Martha Potter. Martha moved to Sag Harbor after 33 years of teaching in public schools. After retirement, she worked part-time at the John Germain Library in Sag Harbor as their program coordinator, taught English as a second language, and is presently teaching a course to help immigrants pass their naturalization test. Her field of expertise is American history, particularly the history of the Constitution and the struggles to gain rights in the United States. She served on the board of the Sag Harbor Historical Society for many years and is currently on the board of directors of the League of Women Voters of the Hamptons. Please welcome Martha.
Good evening. It's always ladies first. Today I will be discussing the United States immigration legislation and its impact on Long Island and the South Fork, showing patterns of our immigration policies throughout our history. Our Constitution allows Congress to establish uniform rule of naturalization citizenship in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4. In 1790, about a year after Washington was inaugurated, naturalization was limited to immigrants who were free white persons of good moral character, who lived in the United States for 2 years. In 1795, this was amended to 5 years. In 1798, John Adams signed the first act designed to control immigration, the Alien Enemies Act. It increased the waiting period to 14 years and authorized the president to detain or deport male citizens of hostile nations above age 14 during times of war. In 1798, the fear of war was France. The act was used again in 1941 to inter Japanese. Ellis Island. Ellis Island became the main entry point to the United States between 1892 and 1954, processing 12 million immigrants. The east end of Long Island was affected by this large influx of immigrants to Ellis Island. In 1880, Joseph Fahey selected Sag Harbor as the future site of the new watch case factory. The relocation of the factory led to a housing boom in Sag Harbor. Approximately 1,000 workers were employed. Recruiters from the factory went directly to Ellis Island and offered immigrants jobs. Fahey's employed a large number of Jewish jewelers from Poland, Hungary, and Russia. The recruitment of many Jewish workers led to the establishment of the first synagogue in Suffolk County. When the John Germain Memorial Library opened in 1910, English classes were offered. The first Polish immigrants came to Southampton in the late 1800s to farm. As luxurious estates started to develop at the turn of the 20th century, Polish immigrants worked as gardeners and caretakers of these estates. A special agent of the Long Island Railroad, Hal B. Fullerton, who was appointed in 1897, worked to promote Long Island. He supported the establishment of experimental farms along the railroad. Italian immigrants became farm workers for the Long Island Railroad Farm Enterprise. At the same time immigrants were settling on Long Island, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, signed by Chester A. Arthur, who, by the way, had a house in Sag Harbor, prohibiting all immigration of Chinese laborers for 10 years. Many Chinese emigrated during the gold rush of 1849 and worked building the Transcontinental Railroad. When the work was completed, there was pressure to stop the flood of Chinese immigrants. This was the first act excluding a particular ethnic group. In 1924, after World War I, President Calvin Coolidge signed the Johnson-Reed Act. This act limited immigration by establishing the national origins quota. The act reduced general immigration to 15% of the pre-World War I levels, setting quotas that discriminated against Southern and Eastern European immigrants. Locally, as noted by Anne Sanford in her book, Grandfather Lived Here, Poles constituted 16% of the total population of Bridgehampton in the 1920s, moving to the hamlet to find jobs on farms. The act limited further immigration of Poles to the United States. The act also authorized immigration authorities to search for illegal immigrants to deport. In 1952, after World War II, the McCarran-Walter Act was passed over President Truman's veto. It upheld the quota system because of the fear of communists entering from the countries in Eastern Europe. More Asian and Latin American immigrants entered the United States. The act introduced a system of preferences based on skill sets and family reunification. The act allowed the government to deport immigrants or naturalized citizens engaged in subversive activities, and also allowed the barring of suspected subversives from our country. President Truman, concerned over the continuation of quota systems, vetoed the law. He stated, quote, "We do not need to be protected against immigrants from these countries. On the contrary, we want to stretch out a helping hand to save those who have managed to flee into Western Europe, to help those who are brave enough to escape from barbarism, to welcome and restore them against the day when their countries will, as we hope, be free again." End quote. A provision in the McCarran-Walter Act particularly affected Long Island farmers. It stated that the employment of illegal immigrants, quote, "including the usual and normal practices incident to the employment of was not to be considered harboring." As a result, for decades, Long Island farmers would not need to worry about being prosecuted for hiring undocumented farm workers. It also established the H-2 visa program, allowing persons to enter and perform temporary work. In 1965, President Johnson signed the Hart-Celler Reform Act. This finally abolished the quota system, which critics condemned as a racist contradiction of fundamental American values. By liberalizing the rules for immigration, especially by prioritizing family reunification, it also stimulated the rapid growth of immigrant numbers. Once immigrants had naturalized, they were able to sponsor relatives in their native lands. More than 7 million newcomers entered the country legally during the 1980s. The trend has continued. The Hart-Celler Act affected the population of Long Island. The act brought a large group of new Asian and Latino immigrants groups, expanding the diversity of the Long Island population. Puerto Ricans were the first Latino community to settle in Long Island. Puerto Ricans were not technically immigrants. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. They were not immigrants, but they established they helped the establishment of Spanish language businesses and neighborhoods, encouraging other Latino immigrants. In 1986, President Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act. The act legalized nearly 3 million undocumented immigrants in exchange for increased enforcement along the United States-Mexican border. It included sanctions against employers. They could not knowingly hire persons not authorized to work in the United States or hire a person without correct documentation. This, however, did not include persons already working. Increased Border Patrol contributed to a surge in the apprehension of unauthorized aliens at the U.S.-Mexican border. Yet in 1984, Ronald Reagan stated, "I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and who have lived here, even though sometime back they may have entered illegally." The Immigration Reform and Control Act led to a large underground workforce on Long Island. Joshua Ruff, in his 2009 article in the Long Island Journal entitled "Diasporas in Suburbia, Long Island's Recent Immigration," states, "The burgeoning economy of wealthy homeowners in the Hamptons has created a huge labor demand in construction and landscaping, as well as in retail and other services. The largest contingent of Long Island's new working wage class were Mexicans by the late 1990s. Others that followed from Ecuador, Guatemala, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Honduras. In 1990, George H.W. Bush signed immigration legislation S-358. This was an extension of the Immigration and Control Act of 1986. Legal immigration increased from 500,000 to 700,000, giving priority to skilled immigrants and establishing the Green Card Lottery program for people from countries with low-rate immigration over the previous 5 years. This was originally lobbied for by Irish and Italian immigrants because their countries were in a depressed state at that point, and they had not emigrated for 5 years. There were 50,000 visas given under this diversity lottery program each year. The act also established temporary protective status for people from countries in armed conflict or suffering from natural disasters. The present administration has not renewed this status. Many countries' status ends in 2018 and 2019. In 2012, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, known as the DREAM Act, was an executive order signed by Barack Obama. The purpose of DACA is to protect eligible immigrant youth from deportation. Youth who arrive in the United States before age 16 and have lived here since June 15, 2007 were eligible to apply. No new arrivals are eligible for DACA. DACA recipients have been able to come out of the shadows and obtain valid driver's licenses, enroll in college, and legally secure jobs. There are over 90,000 youth eligible for DACA in the New York metropolitan area. On February 26, the Supreme Court turned down President Trump's request to shut down this program. 2 federal judges ordered the administration to maintain major pieces of the program while legal challenges moved forward. The Supreme Court's decision temporarily shields DACA recipients from immediate deportation and allows them to keep working legally in the United States. Their status lasts for 2 years and is renewable. On March 29th of this year, the judge in the Federal District Court in Brooklyn ruled the program can continue as cases move forward. President Trump has also issued executive orders barring immigrants from 7 Muslim countries. Federal courts have blocked these orders, stating they violate the First Amendment. To date, Congress has been unable to pass any new comprehensive immigration reform. Immigrants from many countries have settled on Long Island, contributing to the development of its communities and the growth of its economy. Thank you.
might be long-winded.
No.
Our next speaker is Michael
I'm
Nenner.
long-winded, sorry.
I'm sorry. Michael Nenner, who is the general manager of Gurney's Montauk and Gurney's Newport. Michael is a New York City native and graduate of Queens College. He started in the hospitality industry at the age of 20 as a lifeguard and athletic director for residential health clubs in Manhattan and Santa Fe, New Mexico. He acquired extensive rooms division and hotel experience while working at several hotel resorts, including the Phoenician Resort in Scottsdale, Arizona, and the Cloister at Sea Island. And he discovered that he had a real passion for service and the hotel industry. The Four Seasons Resort organization recognized this and recruited him to be the director of rooms at the Ritz-Carlton Chicago, a Four Seasons hotel. The match with Four Seasons was perfect for Michael, and he became involved in corporate initiatives that would help not only his property's service standards, but significantly contributed to the company's 90 properties worldwide. As a result of his participation in these projects, he was promoted to hotel manager at the Four Seasons Hotel in St. Louis. While there, the hotel jumped to the top 10 for guest experience scores and employee engagement. Four Seasons then sent him to Philadelphia and Houston to help drive the leadership standards for those two iconic resorts. In 2015, the ownership group at Gurney's recruited Michael to reinvent and reimagine the 90-year-old oceanfront resort, the East End's largest private employer. Under his leadership, Gurney's began a multi-year renovation of the guest rooms, the 5 restaurant outlets, and all public spaces. In 2016, along with Gurney's ownership group, Michael began the process of purchasing and transitioning the Hyatt Regency Newport into Gurney's Newport Resort and Marina. The Newport Resort has undergone a $15 million guest room, exterior, and public space renovation similar to that of Gurney's Montauk. Michael has created a culture of excellence among Gurney's resort staff, and he has instilled in them a strong sense of team spirit and a willingness to work harder to provide each guest with the ultimate vacation experience. Through his passion for service, Gurney's has become synonymous with an effortless, elegant experience for travelers to the Hamptons. Please welcome Michael Nenner.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate it. And Susan and I got the chance to work together for many years, so thank you so much. As Susan said, I've worked in the hotel industry now for about 20 years. I've been here in the East End for the last 3 years, and I've seen a lot of different types of diversity and the impact of immigration really in many, many different markets. I've worked in 9 different cities over the last 18 years. This being my last city, because I want to be here for quite a while, the East End is really a little different than what I've experienced in other cities. A lot of big market cities, you're able to find a lot of employees within the area in the industry, whether they're working in restaurants or they're working in the hospitality industry. And I think the East End has really been a place that has really given me I really didn't understand how many people that we actually use from within the market, as well as driving more H2Bs. I know you alluded to the H2B program. We actually use between H2Bs, which are people that would really come from the Caribbean, maybe from South America, to come to our market and live and work with us for a temporary visa. And then we also use a J1 program, which could be anywhere from 12 to 24 months or 18 months that they spend with us. We have almost 100 employees that join us on a yearly basis and live in our housing. We house almost 252 employees at Gurney's. It's a little hard to believe that we have one hotel that houses 152 guests, and we have 252 employees that we house. Those 100 employees live with us, and they're really family with us. A lot of them come from Jamaica, they've come from Guatemala, they've come from Mexico and other areas, and they become family, that they come on a yearly basis, and we obtain visas for them to come and service our guests. On the East End, I think a lot of people actually come to the resort. If many of you have come, you've seen our staff during the summer, and I've loved them because they not only work at Gurney's, they end up working at other resorts as well, because they are open to work as many hours as they want as when they come out in the season. It was a little difficult this year. Every couple of years we've had experiences where the H-2B program kind of lags, and they reduce the number of H-2B visas that they offer. This year was no exception to that. They actually took the H-2B program and did a lottery. So they would have 300,000-400,000 people that wanted to come on an H-2B program, and they reduced the number on the East End so that we were all really reduced in the number of visas. This year we had one group that was not accepted for us. So it meant an extra 16 employees that couldn't come and join us this year. A lot of it, for whatever reason, they wanted to make sure that they opened the H-2B program, that they can get all of the visas in and expand. We go to a point that we use an expediting service that helps us with our program, and we apply at 12:01 on New Year's Eve to make sure that we get our visas in for the year. And there were many companies, whether the restaurants, hospitality industries, that did not receive their visas this year. So there will be a lot more work in the market for really the locals that want to come and work in the hospitality industry. Out of our 400 employees, we do have 300 that are local, or they would come from Miami, they come from Manhattan, and other areas to come and join us in our servicing of our guests. The H-2B program, as I mentioned, many of them, out of the 100, I would say at least 70 or 80 of them are repeat employees that have come to work for 10 to 15 years. They've come back through these visa programs to the point that they leave stuff with us in our employee housing, so when they come back, we have it ready for them when they come back. I think the impact for us is, we get the locals, we have our H-2B programs set up, and then we get an influx of, as everybody knows, we have the Irish kids that come out in June that are looking for jobs. They come with their own visas, and they come to the market looking for server positions, cook positions, and anything that we can offer in the area. So that does help us for a bit. But I think the local population really is not invested that much in the hospitality industry and the restaurant industry. I think we have to rely a lot on getting these visas into the market, and having people come out. We do it from a legal standpoint that obviously we check our I-9 forms and make sure that everything is on the up and up on every employee that we hire and onboard from our resort. I think that in years to come, as we expand the hospitality industry, as you know, our resort now runs a 65% occupancy year-round, where Gurney's used to really be in the 30s and 40s, and that's expanding our season. You see that a lot of restaurants out in the East End, the Harvest and other ones, are staying open till Thanksgiving. They're staying open possibly for Christmas. There's 3 or 4 restaurants now in Montauk that would close Columbus Day that are open year-round now. I think that's the case in East Hampton as well, and on the East End in general. And I think as we grow that market, we really need to find different ways to bring people in, whether it's from Manhattan or other areas in the U.S., as well as expand on the immigration visas that we're available to do. We've written letters to our local congressman on this subject, because the visas were restricted this year. And there are other resorts out in the East End that don't have a lot of employees that are going to be struggling this year because they weren't able to hire local staff or obtain local staff and lost out on their H-2B visas. So I think in years to come, it is definitely something that we need to look at. and continue to drive in the market. I know we lose out to a lot of employees as well, because there are undocumented employees that are out here that have been working that I think end up going for lower hourly wages, being paid off the books or in cash, and in the area. And I think those people deserve opportunities to come across in visas as well, so that we can expand our business, and maybe even one day, in keeping them in the market so that they can become citizens as well. I think everyone's deserved an opportunity. I think I know my grandparents came through Ellis Island myself, and I would love that if I had to give the opportunity to somebody else, we'd be able to do that. We are the second largest employer behind the hospital, second largest private employer, and we believe that everyone deserves a chance, because employees that can come from outside, they need to learn about the hospitality industry. There's no better place. A lot of them learn. I know that in my past career, a lot of people have worked as J1s, or they come out for 18-month programs, and they go back to their country, and they actually start in the hospitality industry. And I still have friends many years, or former employees that still write to me from other countries that love to come back to the U.S. if they get the opportunity. So I think we're doing our part to make sure that we open that for everybody. So thank you. Sorry.
Sure, it's okay. Our next speaker is Rob Carpenter. Rob has been with the Long Island Farm Bureau since 1985 and has served as the administrative director since 2014. The Long Island Farm Bureau, based in Riverhead, is a non-governmental volunteer organization financed and controlled by over 3,000 member families for the purpose of solving economic and public policy issues challenging the agricultural industry. The Farm Bureau's mission is to serve and strengthen agriculture on Long Island. Rob is a member of numerous organizations, including the League of Conservation Voters, Long Island chapter, the Peconic Land Trust Public Policy Committee. He's an advisor on the Suffolk County Farmland Committee, chairman of the Suffolk County Soil and Water Conservation District. He serves on the Brookhaven Agricultural Advisory Board. He's the director of the New York Association of Conservation Districts and a voting member of the Suffolk County Council on Environmental Quality. And we're glad he had time to be able to come here today with all of those responsibilities. Please welcome Rob Carpenter.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here tonight, and despite all of my efforts and trials and tribulations of all the other organizations, it's good to get out and to talk to people and to see what's going on in the world. And I appreciate the comments my predecessor speakers had given, and I see quite a lot of similarities between what agriculture is going through and the hospitality industry, and dealing with some of the history is always fascinating to learn and to remember. So I'd like to give a little bit of information about agriculture on Long Island. So for many years, Suffolk County agriculture has actually been the leading agricultural county in New York State. And most people can't believe it when we say that, but by the sales of dollar volume that we produce, we have traditionally been the largest. The agricultural census is done every 5 years, and the last one in 2012 coincided with the yogurt boom. So for the last 5 years, we've actually been number 3 in New York State, because there's two counties in upstate New York, Wyoming and Cayuga, that actually have more cows than people in the county. So when milk prices doubled, they overtook us. Unfortunately, milk prices have come down considerably, and I suspect that when this year's census gets done for 2017, we'll be back to number one. Not good news that we had to win by default, but I wish the best for our upstate producers. So agriculture in Suffolk County still has about 40,000 acres in production. And we have about 600 farm operations that utilize many different types of labor. We produce about $240 million a year in annual sales. And we make up about 60% of the state's horticulture industry, nursery, sod, flowers and greenhouses, which mostly go towards the homeowners and the home industry here in Suffolk County. From a basis of agriculture, we also provide the backdrop for many other industries, which happens to be tourism. Many people come out to visit our wineries and to shop locally at our farm stands for the local producers, and also come out and enjoy the vistas that our farms provide. So we're happy to help and work with our other industries to be able to support an economy here on the East End, not only for the summer months, but also into the winter months. So that's one positive that we have. So in agriculture, not only do we produce about $240 million a year, but we also provide a workforce in Suffolk that numbers upwards over 7,500 workers. And those workers come from many different aspects of our lives. As with the hospitality industry, we have many workers that live here year-round and come in and work in the winter months doing marketing and bookkeeping and fixing of equipment. But we also rely very heavily upon an immigration labor workforce. And I know Ms. Potter mentioned about the H2H program, the H2 program. Agriculture has its own category, which is called H2A. And some of the farmers have started to utilize that here in Suffolk County, but it's a very costly proposition for the farm community. Many farmers are what we call price takers for their products. They're actually commodities. And when the cost of doing business increases, farmers usually have to dip into their profit margin to be able to cover those expenses, because it's very difficult for farmers to pass along increases to consumers, because they compete on a world market with overseas. California is a very big importer for us of vegetables and fruits. We also compete with New Jersey and Connecticut and Pennsylvania, where they have lower costs of doing business. So it becomes very difficult for a farmer when his prices go up or costs go up 10 or 15% to say, you know what, I need to raise the price of a head of lettuce or a bushel of apples, because people come and say, well, I can get those apples in the supermarket or from a different location for $1 a bushel cheaper, so I'm not going to buy it from you, I'm going to go there. And that becomes very hard for farmers to deal with. So many farmers have actually gone to a local based economy where the residents have been tremendous supporters of the farm community in buying these locally grown products. So with that being said, it's very difficult for farmers to get inexpensive labor. Many Americans don't want to work on farms anymore because we hear the excuse, oh, it's too hot out in the sun. Oh, the work is too hard. I have to, these baskets of cauliflower and potatoes and apples are too heavy for me to lift. So we rely very heavily on an immigrant labor force. Our immigrant force comes from many different countries throughout the world, and I've met on farms people that come from Vietnam, who come from the Ukraine, who come from Poland and Holland. Many people come from Ireland, in addition to the normal staples that we think about, which is South America and Central America, and even though it is a territory, also Puerto Rico. So we rely very heavily on that workforce, which is why it's so important for one of the things that we believe in, which is our most pressing issue, which is immigration reform. The farmers also have workers that come back year after year on the farm. I know many farm workers that have been with the same farmer for 20 or 30 years, and their kids actually now work on the farm. I know immigrants that have come here whose children have actually been able to go to schools locally, go to college and graduate and become active, vibrant members of this community. And like the hospitality industry, they want to come back and work on the farm and work many hours because they know that when they go home, they can live very extravagantly from the wages they make here. So it's very important, and it's something that farmers believe in taking care of their workers and allowing them to come back. So it's something we're very supportive of. Some of the programs like the H2A, again, are costly for farmers, and they end up paying the transportation for the workers to get here in addition to the expediter. They're forced to pay an adverse wage rate, which raises their cost of production because that wage rate is normally $2 or $3 higher than what they could pay for somebody coming in off of the street. They also have to house the workers, and housing has become one of our biggest problems. Where do we find the housing necessary to afford to keep the workers here, whether they come through an H2A or a J1 program, or even live here locally? The cost of housing and cost of living here is very expensive, even for our children and young folks, which is why I think we're seeing a lot of people actually leave Long Island to go to other areas where it's cheaper to live. So there's many issues that we need to work on. Hopefully our legislators here and our town officials can find an answer to the housing problem so we can keep some of our local citizens and residents here. And hopefully the government will find a way to come up with some reasonable immigration reforms so that people can come and live here and get a job here and become citizens eventually. I know my great-grandparents came from Poland and came through Ellis Island, and I'm happy that they were allowed to stay so that I could be here tonight. Thank you very much.
Playing musical signs, not musical chairs. Our final speaker is Larry Cantwell. Larry is a lifelong resident of East Hampton and has served as a public official for 42 years. He was first elected to public office at the age of 25, served for 6 years on the East Hampton Town Board, 32 years as the village administrator of East Hampton, and recently completed 2 terms as East Hampton Town Supervisor. Please welcome Larry Cantwell.
This goes up now. Everybody hear me okay? Yep. All right, good. Some of you have been remarking about my beard and my hair, which my wife describes as my early retirement hair crisis. We got past that. When I think about immigration and the issues that it presents, I reflect back to the 60s and 70s when, you know, second homeowners were really discovering East Hampton and the South Fork. And I draw some parallel between the changes that were occurring with second homeowners coming into East Hampton, establishing a home, and immigration. Okay, and here's what it is. You know, the second homeowners were moneyed, or are moneyed in many cases. They tend to be employers, right, of services and goods. And they pay full taxes, but they don't have any children in school. So for the most part, other than whatever social issues arose with respect to second homeowners or locals and those kinds of things, second homeowners were thought of as a good thing. Immigrants, on the other hand, are poor. They tend to be employees, sometimes competing with other employees, and they have children in school, and the community faces the tax consequences, of educating those children. I was asked to talk a little bit about the impact of immigration on local government, and before I do get into some of the specifics of what I think about that and where I think those impacts are, based on my experience and knowledge in the community. I don't know if any of you saw some of the quotes today from the Pope, who was widely quoted. You may read about it tomorrow, talking about abortion activists and talking about immigration. And one of the things he was quoted as saying today was that those who raise concerns about immigration should walk in the shoes of those trying to protect their children and give them a better life. And I thought that was an interesting quote from the Pope. So what are some of the impacts that we see in local governments here? And I think this is true of any of the local governments on Long Island, certainly here on the South Fork of Long Island. We certainly see an impact on school taxes. If you live in an area of Springs, for example, where housing costs tend to be lower, there's a larger and growing population of immigrants throughout East Hampton town, maybe perhaps more so in Springs and Montauk and certain areas of the town. 40–50% of the school-age population is Spanish-speaking immigrants. Communities react differently to that, but when you take money or raise taxes, obviously it raises a concern. So clearly, the growing population of immigrants has increased the school-age population in many parts of the town of East Hampton and in certain school districts throughout town. And people react to that obviously differently. The schools, by the way, in my judgment, in East Hampton town have done a terrific job of adapting to that change. They really have. They have, employed, advisors. That they've employed liaisons. They've worked really hard to bridge the gap, the language barrier gap, and kept, all their students informed as to what's going on within the school system. And I want to commend the school districts for the job that they've done in handling this really big change that's occurred in their schools over the past 20–25 years, whatever it's been. They've really done a good job trying to step up to the plate, provide an education, and integrate people from different backgrounds into the system. And they're to be commended. Now, despite that, it certainly has had an impact on property taxes. It also has raised the issue of overcrowded housing and housing issues that have arisen. On a seasonal basis, certainly in places like Montauk, where there's been some, an open dialogue has started already now on, how do we house seasonal employees, and the town and businesses are starting to get together and talk about, how do you deal with that? Because that in itself creates a crisis, and then where you have overcrowded and unsafe issues in housing, that creates an issue. It creates an issue in neighborhoods, but it creates a health and safety issue as well. People will do, out of desperation, they'll put themselves in harm's way. We certainly, all of you are aware, of situations where basements are divided, by sheets, with no access or, no egress, no multiple points of egress. And, you know, in many cases, those situations are extremely dangerous. Not only does it, I mean, it places certainly the occupants of those houses in a dangerous and unsafe situation, and it creates a potential dangerous situation for firefighters and ambulance responders and others who might have to respond to, you know, a situation there. So, you know, there's certainly an impact on enforcement, on trying to deal with ensuring that, you know, housing is safe and people are being housed safely. That's not necessarily the fault of anyone who is an immigrant. It could also be the fault of you know, a greedy landlord or a greedy primary tenant of a house who's subletting space. But again, you know, the growth in population of people who come here primarily to make a living and provide services that are needed in the community, you know, presents those kind of issues that we as a community, you know, have to deal with. Certainly, growing population of immigrants who are come here to work may not have health care, and the burden that places on institutions like our hospitals is an issue that, you know, I think is something that we should think about. Certainly, Southampton Hospital deals with it. I think they try to deal with it as effectively as they can. But, you know, hospitals have an obligation, as they should, you know, to treat regardless of ability to pay. Nevertheless, it is an impact. You know, I think governments have tried to adjust. They've tried to adjust their training protocols in their police departments. You know, they've tried to add bilingual communication skills in various departments. You know, maybe not completely successfully, but I think all of us, as we move about the community, are aware that we're dealing with, you know, a portion of the population that is Spanish speaking, and that creates a communication challenge that all of us, I think, have to deal with. So I think those are some of the issues that you know, local municipalities have to attempt to address. I think that some progress has been made in our local governments to try to adjust to the changes in our population and the changes in our demographic. Many of them are not happening perhaps quickly enough, but the issues that we have to address in terms of enforcement, in terms of public safety, in terms of housing, in terms of school-age population, are all challenges that as a community we can step up to the plate and deal with, but they are real, and I wanted to point them out. Thank you.
Now we have lots of time for questions. Anyone have a question? Yes, Carol.
Mr. Netter, I think you mentioned that you reached out to our congressman to try to help you with this. Could you share with us what the reaction was from his office and if they've been helpful to either you or Mr. Carpenter?
Yes, sorry about that. We wrote to Lee Zeldin, a lot of our hospitality companies out on the East End, and they said they were addressing the issue, but we still had a lottery that we missed out on some employees, so it was not a huge response from that, no written response that we got back. I will also tell you that, as Mr. Campbell mentioned, you know, for Montauk, I know in that region, they are looking at other companies or other homeowners that are out there and trying to get more people to actually accept locals for housing and stuff, to try and drive that so that we can get more people to help with the housing situation. So it's just a great point to bring up.
I'm confused by the terminology here. The one one point I'm hearing about migrant workers, and I don't know what migrant workers have to do with immigration. Someone explain that to me?
Mr. Carpenter?
I'll take a crack at that. So many years ago, back in the 30s and 40s, there used to be a group of workers that were migrant that did move from Florida up the coast through Virginia into New Jersey, into New York, and even further north. And I believe that you are probably correct that it is a misnomer. Migrant workers are transient workers, whereas immigrant workers come from other countries. So I hope that clarifies it a little
Well,
bit.
it doesn't, because these immigrants, do they qualify for citizenship? Can they apply for citizenship?
The immigrant workers,
Yes. I mean, these coming from Mexico, coming from Guatemala, going wherever, Costa Rica, et cetera. These people coming in, are they true immigrants on this H-2B program or whatever the other programs are for immigrant workers? They're migrant workers, I think.
so again,
Can they apply for citizenship?
so generally through the H programs, the H-2A and H-2B, they're only here on a temporary basis,
Right.
and that's part of their visa.
That
So
makes them migrants.
that, well, again, going by the definition. So to my understanding, they cannot apply for citizenship unless they actually go back to their countries and apply as any other foreign citizen would. Just because they're here does not give them the right to become an immigrant, I believe.
That's why I'm
You
confused.
you cannot apply for citizenship unless you've lived in this country for 5 years, have a green card, and there are several regulations. You can't apply for citizenship just coming and going as a temporary worker.
Julia?
No, in reference to what this gentleman is talking about, migrant workers are people that live in the United States, but they travel from state to state to work. They're not immigrants, they're here. They live in Texas and they pick apples in Washington State. This is not an immigrant, this is a person that is a legal citizen, what have you. I mean, I'm fortunate that I'm here. My mother came here in steerage in 1910 and helped to build this country. And so did my father. And if it weren't for these people, you wouldn't have the United States of America.
Martha, from your history lesson, it seems like what's happening now, although some of us find it vile and gross and ugly in terms of the immigration that has happened repeatedly over time in the United States. Is there anything that you see that's different about what's happening today? Better, worse, or how would you characterize today's immigration stance? And is it going to be, is it just part of the natural ebb and flow of immigration in our country?
That's a good question, Michael. Yes, there is an ebb and flow, and that's what I was trying to bring up when I was speaking. But what's happening today is some misunderstanding of certain of the laws that have been passed and have passed before. For example, at DACA, you can't just come into this country and apply for DACA. The executive order said you had to be here in 2007. You know, and there was a lot, the diversity lottery was for people who have not emigrated to this country in the last 5 years, and originally for Irish and Italian immigrants. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of the laws that were passed before. And I think that is the problem today. If we looked at all the laws and understood them and built upon them, then they wouldn't have many of the problems that we have.
Judy?
This is for Mr. Nenner and Mr. Carpenter. There always is said that you could get American workers if you paid more. And now, of course, is a time of high employment, so that's probably makes it more difficult. But is there truth in that? Are there workers who would be willing to work if you were able to pay them more?
Yeah, I can tell you that, part of the visa program, especially in the hospitality industry, is you have to pay a prevailing wage. So it is a wage that you would pay any other employee that would apply off of the street, really. And it tends that, he was mentioning before that, the cost, it is. We have to pay a visa cost, we have to pay for transportation to get them here, and there is a higher cost to get somebody from another country, and we're paying them the same that they would get as a prevailing wage. So it's open to anyone, really.
Sure.
But I thought her question was, could you get those people here? Could you get local people if you didn't have
No.
to pay more at those wages, at the prevailing wage? Could you get people?
We could, and we get people that do. We plan to have the H-2Bs to fill in positions that we are not able to get. There are many positions that for, let's say in our hotel, the front desk or a server or something, there's a lot of people that want to work in those positions that we don't have to use H-2Bs for. And as you had mentioned, the people that don't want to work as hard, if it's a dishwasher or a cook or a housekeeper, we pay them the higher wage to try and get them to come in, but they don't want to work in those positions. So we end up using immigration and H-2B program on that.
Sure. And I can say that from the farmer's perspective, again, they are limited by being able to pay a wage that's equivalent to the amount of work that's done and the kind of work that is being done. And that's something, again, that many Americans don't want to be out doing, let's say, field work or doing packing work or the work that comes from harvesting a crop, which is unfortunate because in my youth, I used to go out and do that type of labor and enjoyed it actually. But today, many of the young people don't want to do those types of jobs. So it doesn't matter whether you pay them $12 or $15 or $18 an hour. And there are programs and studies that have supported this where the people say, I don't want to work, it's too hard. So in the instances where farmers can find local workers, absolutely they would love to hire them and to have them come to work on the farms, provided that they would be there at the end of the season and stick through it.
Let me just chime in on that. I mean, not only that, but most employers who I know would much rather prefer someone who's living already here or close by here. And the added burden that most employers now have to confront are housing costs, whether they're seasonal or even year-round. Providing housing or some part of your housing has become a part of an employer's responsibility now out of necessity. So from my experience, most would prefer to hire people that already live here, if only for that reason. And I'm sure there are many others.
Yes.
I think this is for Mr. Carpenter. Are you finding that more of the farm workers, field workers are not documented workers only because it becomes more of a hardship for the farmers to bring in the visa workers? Such, in hospitality, I can see it, they also have more interaction with the guests. But do you find that more of your workers are people who are just living here, locally and are willing to work on the farms?
So the best answer I can give is that farmers work very hard to comply with all of the rules and the regulations. They ask for proper documentation and they fill out I-9 forms and verify by driver's licenses or whatever appropriate documentation they are given. I don't know of a tremendous amount of people that work off the books, but I think that most of the workers that are here probably are here and live here year-round. And again, as I said, they want to come back to work on the farms and continue to work because that's what they know and that's what they enjoy.
Anyone else? Yes. person.
We just heard from the hospitality industry and farming, but there is a big industry, it's landscaping. And my impression is that many of these landscapers don't go for the visas to have their helpers. Anybody has any answers? And
You know, I don't know, go ahead.
Yes, correct.
Your impression.
Is correct.
No, I mean, what is that impression based on? I mean, is it based on your audit
They
of
have-
those firms?
They
or-
have
I mean,
maybe
what-
3-4 people, my landscaper, and they keep them over the winter busy with things.
Yeah,
And so they don't have to go back to their country of origin. And I come from West Hampton, there are many landscapers who have their small crews. And I would think that a small outfit like this does not go for a visa for their helpers.
well, look, with all due respect, okay,
Okay.
and I don't want to
I'm
be
just
disrespectful in any way whatsoever, and I don't have any, facts to back this up either, but in my opinion, this is just my opinion, part of the problem with some of the debate that we have and discussions that we have, and this is a very good one, very productive one, isn't based on fact, it's based on emotion and assumption and perception. And, I mean, sometimes those perceptions are right and sometimes they're not. They're just not. And I honestly, and no misunderstanding, it's not directed at you, but, the immigration issue has become a wedge issue in this country.
Sure.
And it divides our country, it divides our communities, and to the extent that people, and I know that you're not trying to do this, exploit that, it's just wrong. And it's not helpful and we don't get ahead, And, I just wanted to say that, the more that we can make this issue about, these two guys have given us their real life experience and information that we can so we can help understand those issues. And the more that we can understand what the real facts are here, the better, I think, as opposed to something else. So.
George?
Yeah, I just want to respond to Mr. Cantwell. I understand perfectly what he's saying, but I think we've got a little polarity here. We can't apply to a discussion like this the rules of a court of law. You can't call upon someone who is trying to make a contribution to have the kind of proof that they would have in a court of law. On the other hand, you're absolutely right that we can't have the thing based upon impression or innuendo or like that. But it seems to me there's a lot of daylight between those two. Now, I have a question. Mr. Carpenter referred to the historical notion of migrant labor, the folks coming up from Florida and working the harvest as they came up. And this may also be not based upon any kind of fact. This may be a total hypothesis. But to Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Nenner, if you were able to get people from elsewhere in the United States who would be willing to do the work and do it at roughly the same cost as you're paying to visa people, would you be willing to make the same housing accommodations for them? Or would I say you, would the industries?
As I mentioned, we house 252 employees.
That's
Who
100
are mostly visa people, I take it.
No,
Oh.
about 100 of them are visa people
Oh.
out of the 400 employees that we have.
Okay.
Right, so
That's
the other half of that is people that are from Miami, or they're from Manhattan, or they're from New Jersey. I've had people from all over the country that, they work in a warmer climate, similar to probably agriculture, that, they're down in Miami working for all winter, and then they want to come up here during the summer because they know where the money is to be made.
Right.
So it's, I think those are migrant people that come and they go where the money is because they're young and they want to be prosperous. So it's, to answer your question, I think that's what I think the majority of the hospitality industry up here sees is that they see people from different regions come in, besides people with the visas.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter?
And I would also say, yes, that if there was a worker, and as part of the H-2A program, farmers are required to advertise in the United States for workers. And if an American worker does come to the farm and says, I want a job, I want to do this work, they are required to hire them. So I think the answer is yes, if there were American workers from no matter where they came from, and all things were equal, I don't think any farmer would have a problem hiring them.
And you try to house them. That was really my question.
If there is housing available, and again, some of the farms, and I know farms here in Bridgehampton and Southampton that do have American workers but aren't required to house them, as Mr. Cantwell said, they're locals and they do travel maybe from, let's say, Santa Mauritius or even further west, and they commute every day, which is very difficult pending the traffic. But I do know of farmers that have local people that live a ways away.
I will say also that we had worked with an expediter to get 10 J1 employees for this year, and I actually called them off because we ended up getting people locally and from around the country that we were able to fill it with, as opposed to bringing somebody from overseas.
Yeah, the DACA program has been executively ended. The courts are fighting it. The courts have stayed it, as I understand it. But I do wonder, and I know many undocumented workers, and I wonder how the undocumented workers and how those who grew up here and were part of DACA feel, and how they relate in our schools, and how they relate as part of the workforce, because, my God, they're in our agricultural workforce. And I know that as a fact. So I kind of wonder how those individuals feel and how those who are polarized, relate to them.
I'll answer that a little bit,
Would
Diane,
you?
because I work with people who are applying for citizenship, and many of their children are DACA children, and they are scared. They are petrified. And they're just, no matter what, they just don't know, because day to day, they don't know what's happening. And the statement that people are gonna come over the border and join DACA is totally incorrect. It's not even part of the executive order. And so people are just frightened, and they just, I know a person who's leaving the country because of fear.
Well, that's what.
And that is true.
The intent. I do have one other now on the caravan. I understand that the caravan occurs every year, and that it occurs so that, because we want undocumented workers. We really do. We've encouraged them in many ways, as employers, as community administrators. We have looked the other way, and we have worked to encourage them to fill our needs. And so they have come, part in NAFTA, part for a lot of reasons. But what I also understand from the caravan is that they come every year to fill seasonal needs. Is that true?
I can tell you, I mean, we do all of our background checks every single year, and it is with I-9s, we have to have the witnesses that double check the license, that checks verifies the numbers, that does all of that. And, there are a lot of businesses that do that.
Okay.
So it's,
I wonder what that caravan really means. And that's really what I'm asking. Because I don't think it means what they are being publicized as. I truly don't.
Listen to NPR.
I'd just like to make a comment. I was here in the 1948, 49, 50, when the migrant workers all came to the potato fields and the cauliflower. And they were housed in not what we would accept the type of housing. Now the problem at the moment is that we're allowing some of the immigrants here to live in this type of, of housing that we might not accept because we desperately need these people. I own a business and have for 50 years now, and to get anybody up locally is, the cost of housing is one of our major problems to do with our whole, it's so interrelated, as Larry Cantwell is saying, with the immigration situation and the employee situation. Gurney's, I hate to say, is an exception to the rule, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we know that the Hampton Jitney does manage to get also import people in the summer with visas and so on. But it's a very difficult situation out here. And our society has changed. Years ago, we didn't have the second homeowners or the amount of money in the same way, the mass that we have now. So I'm really making a statement more than a question.
And I would say, you know, with the changes with the rental registry and things like that, there were hotel companies and restaurants that would put 10, 15 people in a house. I mean, we're lucky enough that we lease 2 hotels, and there's a reasonable amount of people, and we do works to, you know, to the housing every single year to make it comfortable, because we want people to be comfortable with where they're living. But I know from, you know, that's why that law was changed, and I think it's great, because then it gives better housing to these employees that are given.
Thank you. Lady all the way in the back.
You have, several of you have mentioned the numbers of H-2 visas being reduced on the East End. Who is in charge of saying how many visas can be administered, and why have they been reduced on the East End?
You know, apparently it happened 5 years ago as well. Every couple of years, it's a law that has to be, I guess, renewed. And this year was different, that they actually put it up for a lottery. I don't know who made that decision, but it limited the amount. They said that they still could open them up, but we wouldn't get those people probably until July.
The federal government is the answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I have one other question. If the problem, and it certainly seems to be one of the biggest problems, is housing, and all of this would benefit the community and everybody would get more money, and all, why don't the local governments get into creating housing? We all benefit.
Workforce housing is a topic I believe is
That would be another entire subject.
That's on our agenda.
Not in my backyard.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
It's not really a question or a comment, and I think that everybody in this room does know undocumented workers. I mean, they're here. It's not necessarily, and most undocumented workers in this country come in with a visa and overstay their visa. I mean, and this is from every country in the world. It happens, and it is a problem because these people live in the shadows, and they're not, you know, it's hard for them to have a decent life in many respects. Even, you know, even if they want a job, sometimes they can't get it because they don't have the papers. So, but obviously, there are employers out here who are hiring these people. I mean, they're, you know, they are working as cooks and dishwashers and housekeepers and all kinds of other things to make a living. And you know, it's both there, whether or not, you know, and it's something that our government needs to do. Immigration reform is a...
I just want to make a comment. My mother was an undocumented immigrant. She came from Poland because there were pogroms in Poland and her parents were killed and a neighbor brought her over here at a young age. She was an undocumented immigrant and couldn't get her citizenship for many, many years. We all have stories like that in the room.
I mean, I've seen papers of my grandparents also I can't find any citizenship papers, but I see that they came over on a ship, but the rest of it, I'm not sure.
And you don't have a problem getting a job.
On the next immigration panel, educators and the legal profession might be helpful, in addition to these wonderful panelists.
Any other questions? Yes, George?
I have a question about the audience, because I don't know. Is anybody here from Neighbors in Support of Immigrants? Okay. You can tell I'm not with them, otherwise I'd know. How about OLA, the Organización Latino Americana?
We attend their thing.
Okay. Because when I heard about this, I tried to spread it to them. I'm just wondering how it worked.
We appreciate that. Okay. Yes, one last comment, Julia?
No, excuse me, I just wanted to mention about housing for people, local people. East Hampton has done a lot. They just now built for working people to try to keep people here. Fire people, police people, teachers, and so. And then they built something. But even that is not that, it cost you $1,300 for a 1-bedroom. It costs you $1,600 for a 2-bedroom. Who pays salaries like that the local people can afford to live here? It's just, it's ridiculous. They're trying, but the price is crazy.
Thank you. I'd like to say on that subject, I'll answer that question. That if that's a subject that you are interested in and you're concerned about workforce housing, this is the subject that the League has spent a lot of time on. We have a film that we produced many years ago. Barbara Jordan, one of our past co-presidents, produced that. Rest in peace, Barbara. And we welcome your involvement in our future efforts to get this subject noticed and discussed and settled once and for all. So if you are interested and it's something that you're passionate about, please go to our website, lwvhamptons.org, and join us. Any other questions? No. Well, I'd like to thank this evening's speakers, Martha Potter, and thank you to the League's Government Committee under the leadership of Ann Sanford and Kathy Peacock. Thank you to CTV, who is always here, always reliable, and makes us look good on camera.
Thank you.
And Hampton Library for providing this space.
And I'm a native.
Thank you and good evening.